September 19th, 1944, the morning fog over Arracourt lay thick enough to taste. Oberleutnant Werner Sternberg sat in the commander's cupola of his Panther tank, turret number 413, listening to the Maybach engine idle beneath him. The dawn had arrived without sun, just gradual lightening of grey mist that obscured everything beyond 50 meters. Somewhere in that grey blanket, American tanks were waiting. His radio crackled with reports from the 113th Panzer Brigade. The Fifth Panzer Army had assembled 262 tanks for this counteroffensive. Fresh Panthers straight from German factories. New crews who had trained for months on these sophisticated machines. The Americans, intelligence reported, were equipped primarily with M4 Sherman tanks. The same vehicles German forces had been destroying since North Africa. The same design that propaganda dismissively called the Tommy Cooker. When British crews operated them, the Americans would learn what concentrated German armor could accomplish. Sternberg's Panther Ausf G represented the culmination of German armored design philosophy, 50 tons of sloped armor, and a 75mm gun that could penetrate any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 2 kilometers. The Maybach HL 230 P30 engine delivered 700 horsepower. The Boehringer Sturm hydraulic turret traverse system could rotate the turret 360 degrees in 18 seconds when the engine ran at maximum RPM. Everything about the Panther suggested technical superiority. The thick frontal armor measured 100 millimeters at 55 degrees, effectively equivalent to 200 millimeters of vertical steel. German engineering had created what many considered the finest tank in the world. Sternberg had studied the intelligence reports during the night. The folders contained photographs, technical drawings, and assessments compiled from 2 years of combat against American armor. The enemy forces consisted primarily of M4 Sherman tanks, equipped with the short-barreled 75mm gun. The reports catalogued the Sherman specifications with German precision. Weight, approximately 30 tons. Armor, maximum of 76mm on the frontal hull. Gun penetration, adequate against Panzer Mark IVs at close range, but ineffective against Panthers beyond point-blank distance. The mathematics of armor penetration favored Germany overwhelmingly. The Panthers' frontal armor measured 100 millimeters of sloped steel, angled at 55 degrees from vertical. When calculating effective thickness, that configuration provided protection equivalent to nearly 200 millimeters of vertical plate. The American 75mm M3 gun, firing standard M61 armor-piercing rounds, could penetrate approximately 90 millimeters of vertical armor at 500 meters. Against the Panthers' sloped glacis, those rounds would bounce harmlessly even at point-blank range. The Panthers' long-barreled 75mm KWK 42, by contrast, could penetrate the Sherman's frontal armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. The high-velocity rounds traveled at 930 meters per second, carrying kinetic energy sufficient to punch through American armor like sheet metal. German gunners trained to engage at maximum range, where Panther advantages were absolute. Intelligence reports concluded that American armor posed minimal threat to properly deployed Panther formations. Sternberg had no reason to question those conclusions. What the intelligence reports didn't mention was the sound that would change everything. At 0800 hours, when Sternberg's company emerged from the fog near Arracourt, advancing in standard column formation through uncertain terrain, the first thing he heard was not the crack of American guns, but something else entirely. A mechanical whining that seemed wrong, too fast, unnaturally smooth, coming from multiple directions through the fog. His experienced ear recognized it as powered machinery, but the pitch didn't match any German equipment. His gunner, Unteroffizier Klaus Hoffmann, was peering through the TF-12 main sight when the first Sherman appeared 90 degrees to their left, materializing from the fog at less than 400 meters. The American tank sat motionless, engine clearly off, positioned behind a low rise. Before Hoffmann could identify the target or call it out, the Sherman's turret was already rotating toward them with that strange mechanical whine, moving faster than any tank turret Hoffmann had witnessed. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. "Target left, Panzer," Sternberg shouted into the throat microphone. But before Hoffman could manually traverse the turret, 3 more American tanks materialized from different positions. The mechanical whining multiplied as Sherman turrets spun with impossible speed, guns tracking German targets before Hoffman could bring the weapon to bear. The scene unfolded with nightmare logic. Hoffman frantically worked the manual traverse controls, trying to rotate the 55-ton turret. The electric motor hummed as hydraulic pressure built, but the turret moved with agonizing slowness. 10 degrees, 15 degrees, 20 degrees, still 40 degrees from target. The first American shell struck Panther 417 with a metallic crash that echoed through fog. The round penetrated the side armor, detonating inside the fighting compartment. The Panther's turret hatches blew open as ammunition cooked off. The second shell hit Panther 421 in the rear engine deck. Maybach engines burned spectacularly when penetrated, and the power plant erupted in flames that sent black smoke boiling into the gray morning. The third round punched through Panther 415's side armor, killing the crew instantly. 3 Panthers destroyed in 15 seconds before a single German gun had fired in response. Hoffman cranked the manual traverse wheel furiously, his hands moving in the practiced rhythm German tank schools drilled into every gunner. 1 complete rotation moved the turret approximately 1/3 of 1 degree. To traverse 90 degrees required 270 complete rotations, taking trained gunners between 45 and 60 seconds under ideal conditions. Combat conditions were never ideal. The Panther's power traverse offered an alternative to manual cranking, but it required specific conditions that didn't exist in Sternberg's situation. The hydraulic system drew power from the main engine through a power takeoff driveshaft connected to the transmission. At maximum engine RPM, approximately 3,000 revolutions per minute, the system could rotate the turret at 20 degrees per second, completing a full rotation in 18 seconds. But achieving maximum traverse rate required the Maybach engines screaming at red line, a condition tank commanders avoided because sustained high RPM accelerated engine wear. At the idle speed Sternberg had been maintaining for tactical concealment, approximately 700 RPM, the turret traverse rate dropped to approximately 6 degrees per second. Traversing 90 degrees would take 15 seconds, an eternity in combat where American Shermans were firing multiple rounds per minute. Sternberg had kept throttle at idle to maintain acoustic stealth, a tactic that worked brilliantly against Soviet tanks on the Eastern Front. Against Americans who materialized from fog at close range with turrets already moving, the tactic was suicidal. What Sternberg didn't understand, what none of the German tank commanders understood that morning, what German intelligence had somehow failed to discover despite 2 years of combat against American armor, was that they were facing a technical advantage so fundamental it rewrote the tactical equation. The Sherman tanks possessed turret traverse powered by independent auxiliary generators, a component so simple that German engineers had dismissed it as unnecessary weight when evaluating American designs. The American crews Sternberg faced could rotate turrets at full combat speed with main engines off, in complete silence, drawing power from batteries charged by small auxiliary motors and maintained by independent electrical systems that operated regardless of main engine status. The technology had been standard equipment on American medium tanks since 1942, incorporated into the original M4 Sherman designs specifications. German intelligence officers had examined captured Shermans multiple times. They had documented the auxiliary generator's presence in technical reports, but they had never understood its tactical implications because German doctrine assumed powered turret traverse required the main engine running. The Sherman's auxiliary generator sat in the engine compartment, a compact, single-cylinder, 2-stroke engine manufactured by either Homelite or Onan. The device weighed between 79 and 83 pounds, consumed gasoline from its own small fuel tank holding less than 1 gallon, and produced electrical power sufficient to operate turret traverse, radio communications, and interior lighting for extended periods without running the main engine. The system allowed Sherman crews to maintain full combat readiness while parked in defensive positions, with engines silent, invisible to German sound detection methods. The Panther's turret drive, by contrast, was a masterpiece of German engineering complexity and a nightmare of practical limitation. The system used a power takeoff configuration that drew rotational energy directly from the main engine through a secondary drive shaft feeding into a hydraulic pump that powered the turret motor. When the engine ran at 3,000 RPM, the turret could theoretically complete a full rotation in 18 seconds. At idle or low speeds, that time stretched to 93 seconds. More critically, the system only delivered enough torque to hold the gun steady on level ground. On slopes exceeding 5 degrees, the turret drive couldn't maintain position. The gun would drift. German gunners learned to compensate by keeping one hand on the manual traverse wheel at all times, ready to arrest unwanted movement. Sternberg's Panther survived the ambush at Arracourt by reversing into the fog and withdrawing before the Americans could close. 11 Panthers did not. The wreckage told a story that would be repeated across the Lorraine campaign through the end of September. Every destroyed German tank showed evidence of hits to side or rear armor, penetrations that should have been impossible if German crews had been able to rotate their turrets to face threats emerging from multiple angles. The Americans were using the fog not as concealment but as a tactical weapon, appearing from unexpected vectors and exploiting the critical seconds it took German gunners to manually crank their turrets onto target. Captain Kenneth Lamerson commanded C Company, 37th Tank Battalion, 4th Armored Division, a unit that had been in continuous combat since landing at Utah Beach in July. His 5 Sherman tanks had been sitting in ambush positions along the ridge overlooking the Arracourt road for 30 minutes before Germans appeared. Positioned according to doctrine, American tankers had developed through hard experience. Engines off, main power shut down, crews communicating through hand signals, turrets powered by auxiliary generators humming quietly in the engine compartments, producing sound no louder than a sewing machine. Each Sherman in Lamerson's company carried either a homelight or Onan auxiliary generator, single-cylinder 2-stroke engines mounted in fireproof housings with dedicated fuel supplies and electric starting systems. The devices were simple enough that crew members with basic mechanical training could perform field maintenance. The American emphasis on maintainability meant auxiliary generators rarely stayed broken for long, unlike German turret drive systems that required factory-level expertise when hydraulic seals failed. The device weighed less than 85 pounds, fully fueled, but provided electrical power to operate turret traverse continuously for 4 hours without recharging batteries or running the main engine. 4 hours of silent operation, of complete combat readiness, while producing no thermal signature and minimal acoustic signature. Sherman crews could arrive at defensive positions hours before expected enemy contact, shut down main engines to eliminate noise, and maintain absolute readiness through auxiliary power that German sound detection equipment couldn't identify. Lamerson had positioned his Shermans in a semicircle that allowed overlapping fields of fire. When his gunner, Corporal James Morrison, identified the lead Panther through the periscope sight, Lamerson didn't need to give detailed instructions. Morrison's right hand rested on the hydraulic traverse control, a pistol grip mechanism that responded to pressure with variable speed, light touch, slow rotation for fine aiming, firm squeeze, fast traverse for emergency engagement. The oil gear hydraulic system, standard on Lamerson's M4A1, could rotate the Sherman's turret 360 degrees in 15 seconds. More importantly, it was precise enough that Morrison could use it for final gun laying, eliminating the need to switch to manual controls. The engagement demonstrated principles that American tank crews had been practicing since 1943, but German tankers were learning for the first time under combat conditions. Lamerson's gunner acquired the target, applied pressure to the traverse control, and had the gun on target 3 seconds later. The Sherman stabilizer system, a gyroscope-controlled mechanism that maintained gun elevation during vehicle movement, allowed Morrison to fire accurately the moment the tank stopped moving. The first shot from Lamerson's 75mm hit Panther 417 in the side armor, penetrating the 60mm plate and detonating the ammunition storage. The second shot, fired 6 seconds later at a different target, achieved similar results. By the time German gunners had manually traversed their turrets to face the American position, Lamesson's company had destroyed 5 Panthers and was repositioning for another ambush. The fundamental difference was not in armor thickness or gun caliber, but in how quickly crews could bring weapons to bear on emerging threats. American designers had solved this problem in 1941 by making the turret traverse system electrically independent of the main engine. German engineers had chosen the mechanically elegant solution of linking traverse to engine power, creating a system that worked beautifully when conditions were ideal and failed catastrophically when they were not. The Sherman's auxiliary generator represented less than 1% of the tank's total cost, but provided tactical advantages that no amount of armor or firepower could overcome. Staff Sergeant James Barise, commanding 2nd Platoon of B Company, 37th Tank Battalion, experienced the consequences of German turret limitations from a different angle on September the 20th. His 3 Shermans had been advancing south along a secondary road when they encountered 6 Panthers positioned in hull-down defensive positions on the forward slope of Hill 318. The German tanks had superior positions, better armor, and longer range guns. Under textbook conditions, they should have destroyed Barise's platoon before the Americans could return effective fire. The Panthers opened fire at 1,200 meters, achieving first-round hits on 2 Shermans. Both tanks were penetrated, but remained mobile. Barise immediately ordered his platoons to execute a flanking maneuver, splitting his forces to attack from multiple directions simultaneously. The tactic relied entirely on the Sherman's ability to rotate turrets while moving at speed through rough terrain. The German response demonstrated the limitations of the power takeoff turret system under stress conditions. Panther commanders had to choose between maintaining maximum engine RPM for turret traverse or reducing power for better control during movement. The system couldn't optimize both simultaneously. When Panthers attempted to track multiple targets approaching from different vectors, their turrets moved in jerky, imprecise motions that made accurate gunnery impossible. Barise's platoon closed to 400 meters before the Panthers could effectively engage. At that range, the American 75mm gun could penetrate Panther side armor with standard M61 armor-piercing rounds. The engagement lasted 8 minutes. 3 Panthers were destroyed. The remaining 3 withdrew after their crews realized they couldn't traverse fast enough to counter American maneuver tactics. Barise's after-action report noted that German tanks were firing 1 round for every 3 or 4 American rounds, a disparity explained not by crew training, but by mechanical limitations built into the turret drive system. The pattern repeated across the Arracourt battlefield through late September. German tank companies with numerical superiority and better positioned forces consistently lost engagements to American units that exploited turret traverse advantages. The tactical doctrine that worked devastatingly well against Soviet tanks on the Eastern Front failed in Lorraine because American crews could rotate their turrets twice as fast and maintain fire while maneuvering. German intelligence officers began filing reports about American technical superiority in fire control systems, but the reports lacked specific details about what made Sherman turrets so effective. Hauptmann Friedrich Weber commanded the maintenance company responsible for recovering damaged German tanks from the Arracourt battlefield and repairing captured enemy equipment. The Wehrmacht had been operating captured tanks since Poland, incorporating Soviet, British, French, and American vehicles whenever practical. Standard procedure involved recovery teams collecting abandoned equipment, evaluating condition, and determining whether it could be restored to combat capability under German markings. On September the 23rd, Weber's recovery crews brought in a captured Sherman M4A3 that had been abandoned near Arracourt after throwing a track. The tank was otherwise intact, no battle damage beyond the broken track assembly. Weber received orders from division headquarters to prepare the Sherman for combat use, repaint it with German markings, train a crew, and assign it to a tank hunting group. The orders were routine. What wasn't routine was what Weber's technicians discovered when they began examining the Sherman's internal systems with the thoroughness German engineering training demanded. Weber himself was a graduate of Technical University of Berlin, with specialized education in automotive engineering. His maintenance company included master mechanics, electrical technicians, and automotive specialists who approached captured equipment with professional curiosity. The auxiliary generator sat in the engine compartment, mounted on rubber isolators to minimize vibration, a compact, single-cylinder two-stroke engine with its own fuel tank, electric starter motor, and cooling system. The installation was immediately recognizable as the professional engineering, clean routing of fuel lines and electrical connections, accessible mounting points for removal and replacement. But what drew Weber's attention was the tactical implications. The device was connected to the tank's electrical system through a separate circuit that powered the turret traverse motor, completely independent of the main engine. Weber's chief mechanic, Oberfeldwebel Hans Richter, was a former BMW automotive technician with 15 years' experience in precision machinery. He spent 2 hours tracing the electrical wiring through the Sherman systems before fully understanding the implementation. The auxiliary generator charged the tank's batteries through a standard automotive charging system. Those batteries provided power for the turret traverse motor, a compact electric motor manufactured by Oil Gear Company that drove a hydraulic pump feeding the turret rotation mechanism. The entire system could operate indefinitely with the main engine shut down, limited only by the auxiliary generator's fuel supply, which typically lasted 4 to 6 hours. Richter demonstrated the system's capabilities. With the main engine silent, he started the auxiliary generator. The small two-stroke engine fired immediately, settling into a quiet idle that produced less noise than German auxiliary lighting systems. Richter operated the turret traverse controls, and the Sherman's turret rotated smoothly through a full 360-degree rotation in 15 seconds. The turret could be positioned with precision, rotated in either direction at variable speeds, and maintain position indefinitely without manual intervention. Richter had spent 3 years maintaining Panthers and Tigers. He understood intimately the compromises built into German turret systems. The power takeoff configuration had been chosen because it eliminated the weight and complexity of electric motors and generators. German engineers prided themselves on mechanical elegance, creating systems that used engine power for multiple functions through clever gearing and drive shafts. The approach worked magnificently in peacetime demonstrations and poorly in combat conditions where tanks needed to operate at partial power or maintain silence during ambush positions. The American solution was inelegant by German standards. It added weight, complexity, and another potential failure point. But it worked. The auxiliary generator gave Sherman crews tactical options the German tankers couldn't replicate without completely redesigning their power systems. Weber filed a detailed technical report describing the captured Sherman's capabilities, including photographs of the auxiliary generator installation and diagrams of the electrical system. The report reached the Waffenamt, the German Army Weapons Agency, in early October. Engineers there read it with growing concern. General Major Heinrich Knobelsdorff, commanding the First Army in Lorraine, received summaries of the technical intelligence reports during the first week of October. The information confirmed what frontline tank commanders had been reporting for 2 weeks. American Shermans could engage targets faster than German Panthers, despite having inferior armor and guns. The advantage came not from superior crew training or tactical doctrine, but from a mechanical system so simple that German engineers had dismissed it as unnecessary. An auxiliary generator, weighing less than 100 pounds, was neutralizing the combat effectiveness of tanks that cost 10 times as much to produce and required twice as much maintenance. Knobelsdorff ordered the Waffenamt to evaluate whether German tanks could be retrofitted with similar systems. The response came back within days. Impossible. The Panther's engine compartment had no space for auxiliary generators. The turret drive system was built around the power takeoff configuration and couldn't be easily modified to use electric motors. Redesigning the entire turret drive would require halting production for months while new components were developed and tested. Germany didn't have months. The war was entering its final phase, and German industry was already struggling to replace combat losses with existing designs. The more fundamental problem was that German engineering philosophy had optimized for the wrong variables. German tanks prioritized armor protection and gun performance because those were the characteristics that looked impressive in technical specifications and peacetime demonstrations. American tanks prioritized operational flexibility and crew survivability because those were the characteristics that mattered in sustained combat operations. The auxiliary generator represented that philosophical difference in mechanical form. It made Sherman tanks easier to maintain, quieter in defensive positions, and faster to bring into action from concealment. None of those advantages appeared in the statistics that German procurement officers used to evaluate tank performance. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. By mid-October, German tank crews operating captured Shermans reported that they preferred American equipment to their own Panthers for most combat situations. The Sherman's turret traverse system alone made it more effective in the close-range engagements that characterized fighting in French towns and forests. German crews noted that they could engage multiple targets in rapid succession without worrying about engine RPM or turret drive limitations. The Sherman stabilizer system, which German tankers initially dismissed as overcomplicated, proved invaluable for firing accurately during movement or immediately after stopping. The technology was beyond what German industry could replicate during wartime conditions. Lieutenant Colonel Albin Irzik, commanding the 8th Tank Battalion of the 4th Armored Division, filed an assessment of German tank capabilities after the Arracourt fighting that highlighted the turret traverse disparity. His report noted that Sherman crews consistently achieved higher rates of fire than German crews, even when German tanks had superior positions. The advantage was not in the gun itself, but in how quickly American crews could acquire and engage targets. Irzik estimated that Sherman gunners could fire 3 to 4 rounds in the time it took Panther gunners to fire once, a difference explained primarily by turret traverse speed and the ability to use powered traverse for fine aiming. The tactical implications extended beyond individual engagements. American tank companies could execute complex maneuvers that required multiple tanks to engage different targets simultaneously. German companies attempting similar tactics found their Panthers unable to traverse fast enough to maintain coordinated fire. The Sherman's commander also had a turret traverse override that allowed him to control turret rotation from his position, slewing the gun onto targets without waiting for the gunner to manually crank the traverse wheel. German tank commanders lacked this capability, forcing them to give verbal instructions that added precious seconds to target engagement time. The Battle of Arracourt concluded on September 29th, with German forces withdrawing after losing more than 100 tanks and assault guns. American losses totaled 25 Shermans. The kill ratio contradicted every assumption about tank combat that German doctrine had codified since 1940. Superior armor and guns had lost to superior fire control and operational flexibility. The 5-to-1 myth, the propaganda claim that it took 5 Shermans to destroy 1 German tank, was revealed as fiction by actual combat results. In nearly every engagement where American tank crews could exploit turret traverse advantages through maneuver and ambush tactics, they achieved overwhelming victories despite fighting with technically inferior weapons. Oberleutnant Sternberg survived the Arracourt fighting and was reassigned to a reformed Panzer unit in November. His new Panther, turret number 538, had the same Maybach engine, the same hydraulic turret drive, the same fundamental limitations that had cost 11 tanks from his original company. German industry had received the technical reports about American auxiliary generators and turret systems. Engineers understood the advantages American crews enjoyed, but there was no time to redesign German tanks, no spare industrial capacity to retool production lines, no way to retrofit existing vehicles with systems they hadn't been designed to accommodate. The auxiliary generator that American designers had included in the Sherman's original specification, a component so simple it barely rated mention in technical manuals, had become one of the decisive advantages of armored warfare in Western Europe. German tankers would spend the remaining months of the war fighting with turret systems that required maximum engine RPM for effective operation, giving away their positions through engine noise and struggling to engage multiple targets in the fluid combat conditions that characterized the fall of the Third Reich. The technical superiority German propaganda promised had materialized on the American side, hidden in an 80-pound generator that most historians would never notice. The winter of 1944 brought a different kind of reckoning to German tank forces. Oberst Otto Riemer, commanding the Führer Brigade during the Ardennes offensive, had 12 captured Sherman tanks attached to his unit. The Americans called it the Battle of the Bulge. German planners called it Wacht am Rhein, the last chance to split Allied forces and force a negotiated peace. Riemer's Shermans, repainted with German crosses and operated by carefully selected crews, were supposed to create confusion behind American lines. What they actually revealed was how thoroughly American engineering had solved problems that German industry couldn't address. Feldwebel Ernst Bäumer had been a Panther commander until his tank threw a final drive outside Bastogne during the opening phase of the Battle of the Bulge. The failure occurred on December 17th, during movement through dense forest on narrow muddy roads. The right final drive, already weakened by months of hard use, surrendered completely when the driver attempted a pivot turn around a destroyed American half-track. The housing cracked audibly, followed by grinding metal as gears stripped themselves without lubricant. The Panther coasted to immobilized halt, a 45-ton paperweight blocking the narrow track while German columns backed up behind it. The replacement his unit gave him 3 days later was a captured Sherman M4 A376, one of the newer American models with the long-barreled gun that had started appearing in combat during late summer. The tank had been captured intact when its crew bailed out after hitting a mine that damaged suspension but left the vehicle recoverable. German mechanics had repaired the suspension, repainted it with large white German crosses, and assigned it to Führer Brigade. Bäumer spent his first full day with the Sherman conducting familiarization training that German doctrine required. The driver's controls were straightforward, similar enough to German practice that adaptation required hours rather than days. The gunner's station presented more challenges with American optical sights that used different reticle patterns. But the real revelation came when Bäumer began learning the turret traverse system. The auxiliary generator puzzled him initially, seeming like redundant complexity when German experience had proven single prime movers could power multiple systems through proper engineering. Why design a tank with 2 separate power systems when one well-designed solution should suffice? German doctrine emphasized mechanical elegance through integration, using the main engine to power everything through clever gearing and driveshafts. The American auxiliary generator seemed wasteful, adding 80 pounds, a separate fuel system, and another motor that could fail. The answer became obvious during his first combat patrol on December 18th. His platoon of 3 Shermans advanced through the Ardennes forest in conditions where snow, terrain, and American resistance made movement slow. Radio intelligence indicated American reinforcements moving through the sector, probably tank destroyers responding to reports of German armor penetrating defensive lines. Bäumer positioned his Sherman in an ambush position, overlooking a road junction where a valley narrowed between steep hills. He shut down the Ford GAA V8 engine, that enormous 500-horsepower power plant that produced distinctive sounds German tankers could identify from half a kilometer away. The silence that followed was profound, interrupted only by wind through snow-covered trees and occasional distant artillery. Then, Bäumer started the auxiliary generator using the electric starter button. The Onan single-cylinder engine fired with a muffled pop, settling into a quiet idle that produced less noise than a motorcycle at 30 meters. In the forest, with wind and terrain muffling sound, the auxiliary generator was effectively silent beyond 50 meters. With that small motor running, Bäumer's Sherman maintained full combat readiness that his Panther could never match. The turret traverse system worked perfectly, responding instantly to gunner input with smooth rotation at variable speeds. The radio equipment could receive and transmit without battery drain. Interior lights provided illumination for map reading and ammunition handling. His gunner, Walter Schneider, could rotate the turret at will, tracking potential targets, practicing engagement procedures, maintaining absolute readiness for the instant American vehicles appeared. The Sherman could wait in ambush for hours, consuming minimal fuel from the auxiliary generator's small tank, while Bäumer's Panther would have required the Maybach engine running at idle, consuming 20 liters per hour, and announcing German presence to any American with functional hearing within 500 meters. The engagement occurred at 14:30 hours, when 3 American M10 tank destroyers appeared on the road, moving cautiously. Schneider had the turret already oriented toward the kill zone. When the lead M10 entered effective range, Schneider fired without requiring orders, the 76mm gun cracking once and achieving a first-round hit that disabled the American vehicle. The Sherman's turret traversed smoothly onto the second M10, the powered hydraulic system moving with speed and precision. Manual traverse could never match. Second round fired, second target hit. The third M10 attempted to reverse, but the Sherman's turret tracked it effortlessly, the gunner applying variable pressure to maintain aim on the moving target. Third round fired, third target destroyed. The engagement lasted 45 seconds, from first shot to silence. Bäumer's experience with his Panther told him that same engagement would have unfolded differently with German equipment. The Panther's turret drive required the main engine running for power traverse, meaning the ambush would have begun with engine startup, giving Americans acoustic warning seconds before first shot. The traverse system's imprecision would have required manual control for final gun laying, adding seconds to each engagement. The Germans might still have won through superior positioning, but American crews would have had more time to respond, to disperse, to return fire. The Sherman's independent turret drive eliminated those critical seconds, turning tactical advantage into absolute dominance. The Sherman's turret traverse controls felt strange to German hands accustomed to manual cranking. The oil gear hydraulic system responded to pressure variations on the pistol grip with proportional speed changes, light pressure for precise aiming, firm pressure for rapid target engagement. Bäumer's gunner, a veteran Panzer crewman named Walter Schneider, needed 3 hours of practice before mastering the sensitivity. Once he did, Schneider's rate of fire increased dramatically. He could acquire a target, traverse onto it, and fire in the time it had previously taken just to traverse. The system eliminated the wasted motion of German procedure, where gunners used power traverse to approximate target position, then switched to manual controls for final laying. The stabilizer system impressed Schneider even more than the turret drive. German doctrine insisted that tanks fire from stationary positions after careful aiming. The Sherman's gyroscopic stabilizer maintained gun elevation automatically during movement, compensating for terrain irregularities and vehicle motion. When Bäumer gave the order to halt, Schneider could fire immediately with reasonable accuracy. The first-round hit probability wasn't as high as with carefully aimed shots, but in combat, speed mattered more than perfection. Getting 3 shots off in the time opponents managed 1 provided its own accuracy through volume of fire. Bäumer's Sherman survived 2 weeks of combat during the Ardennes offensive before mechanical failure forced its abandonment. In that time, he engaged American tanks 4 times, German tanks twice, through mistaken identity, and various Allied vehicles too numerous to count. The experience convinced him that German tank design had optimized for the wrong battlefield. Panthers and Tigers excelled in long-range duels on open terrain, where their superior guns and armor dominated. Shermans excelled in close-range combat in towns, forests, and broken ground where rapid target engagement mattered more than penetrating thick armor at 2,000 meters. The war Germany was fighting in late 1944 favored American capabilities. The technical reports about Sherman turret systems accumulated in Wehrmacht files throughout the winter. Engineers at the Kummersdorf Proving Ground, Germany's primary armor testing facility, conducted detailed examinations of captured tanks, Their reports documented not just the auxiliary generator and turret drive, but the entire philosophy of American tank design. Sherman components were designed for rapid replacement. Engines could be swapped in 4 hours. Final drives that took German crews 2 days to replace on Panthers could be changed on Shermans in 6 hours. The differences stemmed from American industry's mass production expertise and willingness to sacrifice mechanical elegance for operational practicality. German tank production in 1944 averaged 300 Panthers per month, a number that German industry considered impressive given material shortages and Allied bombing. American and Soviet production that same year exceeded 1,000 tanks per month each. The numerical disparity meant that even if individual German tanks were superior in armor and firepower, they faced opponents who could absorb losses and continue offensive operations. The Sherman's mechanical reliability and ease of maintenance meant American units maintained higher operational readiness rates than German forces struggling with complex, maintenance-intensive vehicles. The turret traverse advantage was one element of a larger pattern where American engineering prioritized operational requirements over technical sophistication. German tanks had better guns because German metallurgy and precision manufacturing allowed longer barrels with tighter tolerances. American tanks had better fire control systems because American electrical and hydraulic industries could mass-produce complex components reliably. Neither approach was inherently superior, but combat results in 1944 and 45 demonstrated which philosophy worked better under wartime conditions. General Oberst Heinz Guderian, Inspector General of Armored Troops, received a comprehensive assessment of American tank technology in January 1945. The report, compiled by Waffenamt engineers, concluded that German armor had lost its technical advantage through a combination of strategic mistakes and industrial limitations. The decision to link turret traverse to engine power through power takeoff of systems had seemed logical in 1940 when it saved weight and complexity. By 1944, that decision cost German tank crews their lives because they couldn't engage targets as quickly as American opponents equipped with electric traverse systems. Guderian's response to the report never reached implementation. Germany lacked the industrial capacity to redesign existing tanks or develop new models incorporating American innovations. The Maybach and Daimler-Benz engines that powered German armor were already stretched beyond their design limits. Adding auxiliary generators would require modifying engine compartments that had no spare volume. Switching from hydraulic to electric turret drives would require electrical systems that German industry couldn't produce in sufficient quantities. The technical solutions existed in theory, but were impossible to implement with Germany's collapsing industrial base. The broader implications extended beyond turret systems to fundamental questions about how modern warfare rewarded different types of innovation. German engineering excelled at pushing the boundaries of what was theoretically possible, creating vehicles like the Tiger II with armor so thick no Allied tank gun could penetrate it frontally. American engineering excelled at producing reliable, maintainable equipment that soldiers could operate effectively under combat stress. The Tiger II was a technical marvel that broke down frequently and consumed fuel at rates that made operational movement difficult. The Sherman was an adequate tank that crews could maintain in the field, and that industry could produce in overwhelming numbers. Captain Clarence Smoyer, commanding a Sherman EZ-8 from the 3rd Armored Division's Spearhead Task Force, encountered a Panther during the Battle for Cologne on March 6, 1945. The city was the first major German urban center to fall to Allied forces, and its capture involved brutal street fighting, where tanks became both assault guns and mobile fortresses. Smoyer's task force had been ordered to secure the cathedral square, advancing through narrow streets where medieval buildings created kill zones favoring defenders. The engagement took place on Kölnerstrasse, a commercial street lined with 3-story buildings that created a canyon barely wide enough for 2 tanks to pass. Smoyer's Sherman, nicknamed Eagle 7, was lead tank when his bow gunner spotted movement ahead. The distinctive profile of a Panther emerged from behind a burning truck, turret traversing to engage. The range was less than 100 meters by the time both tanks achieved mutual identification. Neither vehicle could maneuver. The street was too narrow for reverse movement without backing blindly around corners. Buildings prevented flanking. This would be a straight gunfight, where whoever fired first would almost certainly win. Under these conditions, every advantage the Panther normally enjoyed was neutralized. The thick frontal armor meant nothing at point-blank range, where even the Sherman's 76mm gun could penetrate. The superior German gun meant nothing when both weapons could kill with single shots. The engagement would be decided entirely by which crew could acquire target, traverse onto it, and fire first. Speed of action was everything. Smoyer's gunner, Corporal John de Riggy, had spent 8 months fighting from Normandy to the Rhine. He had fired the Sherman's main gun more times than he could count. His hands knew the traverse controls with unconscious precision that came from repetitive action under stress. When Smoyer identified the Panther and called target tank 12 o'clock, traverse right 5 degrees, de Riggy's right hand was already applying pressure to the oil gear hydraulic control stick. The turret responded instantly, rotating smoothly through the required angle. No manual cranking, no switching between power and manual traverse. Just immediate, precise response that brought the gun onto target in less than 2 seconds. The Panther's gunner was performing the same action with different equipment. German doctrine required him to use power traverse to bring the gun approximately onto target, then switch to manual controls for final precise laying. The procedure was drilled into every German gunner from initial training forward. Power traverse for gross movement, manual control for precision. The transition required removing one hand from the power traverse control, grasping the manual traverse wheel, and making fine adjustments through physical cranking. The process took time, perhaps 3 seconds for a well-trained crew, but 3 seconds was an eternity when American guns could fire in 2. De Riggy fired when his sight picture confirmed the gun was on target. The 76mm M1 gun cracked with violent recoil. The armor-piercing round crossed 100 meters in less time than human nervous systems could process, struck the Panther's gun mantlet at the intersection where turret armor met gun assembly, and penetrated with catastrophic effect. The German tank didn't explode cinematically. It simply stopped functioning as crew members died and internal systems failed. The engagement had lasted 4 seconds, from initial sighting to enemy destruction. American victory through mechanical advantage that measured in fractions of seconds. De Riggy later told reporters from Stars and Stripes that using the Sherman's fire controls in combat felt like the difference between steering a car with power assistance versus steering one without. Both systems worked. Both could accomplish the mission, but one required significantly more physical effort and time. German gunners manually traversing their turrets, switching between powered and manual controls, were doing the equivalent of driving without power steering, while American gunners used hydraulic systems that multiplied their input force 100-fold. The mechanical advantage was invisible to external observers, impossible to see in photographs or assess through damage inspection, but decisive in determining who lived and who died in point-blank urban combat. The Cologne engagement became famous after war correspondents filmed the aftermath, showing the destroyed Panther with Smoyer's Sherman visible in background. The footage appeared in newsreels across America, presented as evidence of American fighting spirit. What the newsreels didn't show, what reporters didn't understand enough to explain, was that American victory depended not on courage or superior marksmanship, but on turret traverse systems that responded 2 seconds faster than German equipment. Those 2 seconds, invisible in film and impossible to quantify in after-action reports, represented the cumulative result of engineering decisions made 3 years earlier when American designers specified auxiliary generators and electric turret drives as standard Sherman equipment. The final months of the war saw German tank forces reduced to remnants of their former strength. operating vehicles that no longer held any meaningful technical advantage over Allied armor. The myth of German superiority that propaganda had cultivated since the early war years dissolved under the weight of combat statistics. In engagements where American and German tanks fought under comparable conditions, American forces consistently achieved favorable kill ratios through superior fire control, better tactical coordination, and mechanical systems that worked reliably under field conditions. The Sherman's auxiliary generator, the component that enabled independent turret operation, never appeared in popular histories of the war. Historians focused on gun calibers and armor thickness, the specifications that seemed obviously important. The humble 80-pound generator that let Sherman crews operate silently in ambush, traverse their turrets at full speed regardless of engine state, and maintain electrical power for hours without running the main engine, remained invisible in historical accounts focused on dramatic technological advantages. Yet, that generator and the turret systems it powered gave American tank crews tactical capabilities that German engineering never matched. Hauptmann Weber, the maintenance officer who had examined the captured Sherman at Arracourt, survived the war and emigrated to the United States in 1952. He found work as an automotive engineer in Detroit, where he watched American manufacturing methods dominate the global automobile industry through the same principles that had made the Sherman effective: mass production, standardized parts, emphasis on reliability over complexity, and willingness to sacrifice engineering elegance for practical functionality. The Americans built cars the way they had built tanks, prioritizing what worked over what was theoretically optimal. Weber never forgot the moment he first saw the Sherman's auxiliary generator during that examination in September 1944. The device represented everything German engineers had dismissed as unsophisticated. A simple two-stroke engine, crude by German standards, connected to a small generator that any electrical apprentice could repair. Yet, that simplicity had provided American tank crews with capabilities that Germany's most advanced designs couldn't match. The lesson was one that German industry learned too late to affect the war's outcome. Technical sophistication mattered less than operational effectiveness. Engineering elegance meant nothing if it didn't help soldiers win battles. The Battle of Arracourt ended with American forces firmly in control of Lorraine and German panzer forces withdrawn to defensive positions they would never leave. The 11 days of combat had cost Germany more than 100 tanks and demonstrated conclusively that American armor doctrine could defeat German technical superiority through better tactics, superior fire control systems, and mechanical advantages hidden in components that weighed less than 100 pounds. The Sherman's auxiliary generator and electric turret traverse were not wonder weapons. They were practical engineering solutions to combat problems, implemented by designers who understood that wars were won by equipment that worked reliably rather than equipment that looked impressive in specifications. Sergeant Morphew, who had been part of the 3rd Platoon during the initial Arracourt engagements, later recalled watching Panthers burning along the Arracourt road and wondering why German crews hadn't been able to return fire effectively. The answer, which he wouldn't learn until after the war, was that those Panther gunners had been frantically cranking manual traverse wheels while Morphew's own gunner used powered hydraulics to engage multiple targets in rapid succession. The mechanical advantage was invisible from outside the tank, but decisive in determining who lived and who died. The stabilizer system that allowed Sherman gunners to fire accurately while moving or immediately after halting represented another American innovation that German engineering never replicated during the war. The technology required precision gyroscopes, hydraulic components, and electrical systems that German industry couldn't produce in the quantities needed for widespread tank installation. American industry, drawing on expertise from aviation instrumentation and naval fire control systems, could manufacture stabilizers as standard equipment for every Sherman rolling off production lines. The result was that American gunners could take shots German doctrine considered impossible, firing on the move or during the critical seconds after stopping when targets were most vulnerable. The post-war tank developments reflected lessons learned from Sherman combat experience. The M26 Pershing, which arrived in Europe during the final months of fighting, incorporated improved armor and a 90mm gun, but retained the electrical turret traverse system and stabilizer that had made the Sherman effective. The auxiliary generator remained standard equipment, providing backup power for all electrical systems independent of the main engine. American tank design philosophy continued prioritizing operational flexibility and crew survivability over raw specifications. The approach proved enduringly successful, influencing tank design through the Cold War and beyond. German tank design, by contrast, reached a dead end with vehicles like the Jagdtiger and Maus, super heavy tanks that embodied the philosophy of solving problems through thicker armor and bigger guns. Both vehicles were mechanically unreliable, difficult to transport, and too heavy for most bridges. They represented the logical conclusion of engineering doctrine that valued technical sophistication over battlefield practicality. The few examples that saw combat achieved limited success before breaking down or being abandoned due to mechanical failure. The contrast with American design philosophy was absolute. Germany built the world's most powerful tanks. America built tanks that won the war. The auxiliary generator that powered Sherman turret systems weighed 79 pounds in the Homelight configuration, 83 pounds in the Onan version. It cost approximately $140 to manufacture, less than 1/10 of 1% of the Sherman's total production cost. That component, combined with the oil gear hydraulic traverse system and Westinghouse stabilizer, gave American tank crews the ability to engage targets 3 to 4 times faster than German opponents. The return on investment was measured in lives saved and battles won. German engineering had optimized for the wrong variables, and no amount of armor thickness or gun performance could compensate for the tactical advantages American crews enjoyed through superior fire control. Oberleutnant Sternberg, the Panther commander who survived Arracourt, was captured by Soviet forces in April 1945 while commanding a King Tiger near Berlin. He spent 4 years in prison camps before returning to Germany, where he eventually worked as a technical instructor teaching mechanical engineering. His lectures on tank design always included the story of that September morning when his Panther company encountered Sherman tanks that could traverse their turrets faster than he'd believed possible. The lesson wasn't about American superiority or German inadequacy. It was about how engineering decisions made in peacetime affected combat results years later, and how technical elegance sometimes mattered less than practical functionality. The Sherman tank's reputation suffered in post-war years as historians focused on its armor limitations and gun inadequacy compared to German heavy tanks. The narrative of 5 Shermans needed to destroy 1 German tank became accepted history despite being contradicted by actual combat records. The Battle of Arracourt and similar engagements where American tanks achieved overwhelming victories through superior tactics and fire control systems were forgotten or dismissed as anomalies. The technical advantages that made those victories possible, hidden in components like auxiliary generators and hydraulic turret drives, remained invisible in histories that prioritized dramatic specifications over operational capabilities. The revolution in tank combat that began with a simple auxiliary generator and electric turret traverse system represented one of the untold stories of American industrial and engineering success during World War II. While German propaganda emphasized armor thickness and gun caliber, American designers created systems that let tank crews fight more effectively under actual combat conditions. The difference between theory and practice, between what looked impressive in specifications and what worked reliably in battle, determined the outcome of armored warfare in Western Europe. The Sherman's humble auxiliary generator, weighing less than most soldiers' combat packs, had helped win the war by giving American crews the ability to shoot first, shoot accurately, and shoot again before German opponents could respond. That advantage, multiplied across thousands of engagements and hundreds of thousands of rounds fired, had transformed adequate American tanks into the weapons that defeated the Third Reich's finest armored forces. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.